So the other video was on how to find surface area of all of the solids that had only straight lines, so any prism or any pyramid. This video is for on all the ones that are going to have curves in them, so that would be cylinders, cones, and spheres. Now, all you have to do is figure out what figure you're dealing with, a cylinder, a cone, or a sphere, and then plug it into that formula. Okay, so for the cylinder, we know that it's kind of like a prism with circles for bases. It's going to look something like that, like a soup can. A cone, again, you could think of like a traffic cone or an ice cream cone. So it's a pyramid, really, with a circle as its base. And then a sphere, we know, is just a ball. Okay, now notice all three of them, all three formulas have R in them, and that would be your radius. Okay, so we know what the radius is. We know that the radius is half the diameter. So if I had a circle, half of it, that's going to be your radius. And we know that. We've dealt with that before. Now the height, we used the height when we were doing volume. The height would be this distance. Okay, it's from the middle here of the cylinder the whole way to the middle of the bottom one, or you could think about it as being on the outside. It's a distance between the two bases. So that distance is going to be h. It's from here to here. That's your height. Now, we also use the height in a cone. This was your height. However, we don't need the height when we're dealing with a cone. If you look at the cone, we have a new letter here, small l, and sometimes you'll see it as a cursive L. But slant height is exactly what it sounds like. It's the slant. So it's starting at the top here of the pyramid and going down the slant of it. So this distance, that is going to be your slant height, small l. So actually for a cone, you can see we don't need h. There's no h in here, so we actually don't need this. You only need the slant height. Now there is no slant height in a cylinder because it doesn't have a slant. It's all up and down. So for the cylinder, we're still going to use h. Still going to use this in our formula. But in a cone, we're not going to use it. We're only going to use the slant height. Okay, so again, it's as simple as finding what kind of solid you have and plugging into the formula. So my first one, it says it's a cylinder. Okay, so if I'm looking at my surface area formula, which again, you'll be given these, you don't have to memorize them. Surface area is 2 pi r squared plus 2 pi r h. So in my cylinder, I can see my diameter is 6. That means my radius is going to be half as big, so my radius is going to be 3. And my height is going to be 12. So all I have to do is come down here to my formula and plug it all in. 2 pi times 3 squared plus 2 pi times 3 times 12. Now you can put that entire thing into your calculator exactly how it looks. 2 pi 3 squared plus 2 pi 3 12. You can put that all in and it'll give you your answer. If you do that, your answer should be 282.7 square feet. And that's if you use pi, the actual pi button. If you use 3.14, it's going to be very close. It'll be 282.6 square feet if you're using 3.14. So it's up to you. Both answers are correct. It doesn't matter to me. You'll be able to use whatever you want on the test. Okay? So if you have a cylinder, all you need is the radius and the height. Plug into your formula. Plug into your calculator. You're good to go. Now, for my cone, okay, again, start with your formula. Use the cone formula. So the surface area of a cone is pi r squared plus pi rl. And remember, L is your slant height. So I see my radius is 22, and now I have two numbers here. Okay? 54 is on the slant, that's your slant height. 49 would be h, but we don't need h, so I don't need to use that 49. So into my formula, I'll have pi times 22 squared plus pi times 22 times 54. And again, you can plug that completely into your calculator, just how it is, and you should get 5,252.7, and it is square yards because we're finding area. And again, that's if you're using the pi button. If you use 3.14, it's going to be a little bit different, 5250.1, and that's if you use 3.14. So either of those two answers are correct. It doesn't matter to me which one you use. So there's your cone. And the biggest problem with the cone, not problem, but the biggest difference with the cone is we're using that new dimension. We're using the slant height instead of the actual height. And maybe a good way to remember that is the slant height is on the outside of the figure, and remember we're finding the surface area, so we're going to be dealing with the surface. The height goes right through the middle of the cone, and that doesn't deal with anything on the outside. So maybe that's a good way to think about which one to use. And now finally our sphere. And again, all you have to do is figure out what formula you're using. So in this case, surface area is just 4 pi r squared. So my radius is 22. And again, you can just plug directly that whole thing directly into your calculator, and you should get 6,082.1 square inches. And again, that's if we're using pi. If you use 3.14, you get something a little bit different. But either way, you would get the right answer. So you should be getting one of those two answers, depending on if you're using the pi button or 3.14. Okay? So for the three figures that have curves in them, cylinders, cones, and spheres, you just figure out what figure you have. You'll always need to know the radius. For a sphere, that's all you need to know. For a cylinder, you also need the height. And for a cone, you would also need the slant height. Now, on the back of these notes are 3 more problems. They're just extra practice. I'm not going to make a video to explain how to do those 3, but the work is there. So if you need help figuring out what I did for that work, just ask and I can clarify anything. And then the last problem on the back there is a bonus question. It's a hemisphere. Just remember, you're finding the surface area. So if you wanted to paint it, think about what surfaces you would have to paint. If you think you can get the right answer on that, come and ask me. I'll tell you if it's right or wrong, and I can give you some bonus points if you get it right. Okay? If you have any questions, you can either rewatch the video or you can ask me to clarify anything.